Hello, my name is Sophie. I am the creator of sofiedolls, and a few years ago I started my latest ambitious project, the line of 1:6 scale male and female ball-jointed porcelain dolls. I created them from scratch using only traditional technologies. This was a long journey, and today I want to take you along with me. So buckle up and enjoy the trip. The first step of doll creation is model making. The model is the prototype which is used to make plaster molds and, after that, casting the doll in porcelain. I start by making a simple draft. I don't bother to make it too detailed and elaborated. For now, I only pay attention to general size, shape and proportion. I also make sure to draw the joints. It is very handy to sketch the rough size and position of the joints. I am making this model out of air dry clay, but first I make a carcass of aluminum foil. The doll must be hollow on the inside, so I need some material I can remove later, and the foil would do just fine. I make sure all pieces of foil match the shape I drafted, then I rub them in painter's tape so they don't stick to clay. Then I put a layer of clay on top of my aluminum skeleton. Again, I follow my draft when I start shaping the body, but the more I move on with the project, the more I drift away from it. There is a big difference between a flat object, like a sketch, and a three-dimensional sculpture. When you start sculpting, the shape you drew might feel wrong in 3D. This is why I prefer to refine the shape as I go and not to follow my draft too strictly. With this project, I went back and forth with my vision quite a lot, but let me tell you how the process went. First, I sculpted the bodies as a whole unit. Then I started cutting them where I wanted to make a joint. Here you can get a good look of how this part goes. The bigger joints are made of the same air dry clay, when the smaller ones are made of epoxy sculpt or wooden beads. Then I added more definition to the body. As the last part of the body, I made the hands. For something so tiny, I used epoxy sculpt once again. For the palms, I reused some scrapped resin hands I made in the past. I start by adding tiny sausages of epoxy, bend them to shape, and when the clay is cured, cut the excess off to make tiny fingers. Last, I sanded them to make everything nice and smooth. Hands are done, they are missing fingernails and fine details, but be sure I will add them later. When the body is done, seems like a good idea to make a head. For this project, I wanted to make a face that would work for both genders. As the face is the most elaborated part and it needs to be as perfect as possible, I decided to first sculpt it out of modeling clay and then make an intermediate cast in porcelain. I first made a base, which is a simplified skull with ears, then put modeling clay on and started sculpting. I moved from overall shape to finer details, also switching from bigger to finer sculpting tools, and finish off with a needle. When I was happy with this face, I made a plaster mold and casted it in porcelain. This allowed me to refine the face even more. I removed any unevenness and added more definition to the features. Here you can see the face fresh from the mold and after the refinements. Now, when all the parts of the models are sculpted, I sand everything with increasingly finer sanding sponges. I also temporarily assembled the models to check if everything is symmetrical and the joints work properly. A millimeter added or removed makes a world of difference. And then I moved to the final step of model making. To make the pieces perfectly smooth and waterproof, I primed them. After several layers of primer with sanding in between them, the models are finally done. I can now assemble them and show you a preview of how future dolls would look. Even though these guys look quite good in grey, I need to now cast them in porcelain. So let's move on to mold making. To make the mold, I first need to determine where the seams will be. Each mold consists of 2 or more parts, and seams are the lines where these parts connect to each other. If I draw the line in the wrong place, the model would get stuck in the mold. Then I start building the mold boxes. For now, part of the model should be isolated from plaster, so I put clay around it, following the seam lines. I also add sprues in which I will pour the porcelain later. Then I add walls around the perimeter of my mold boxes and secure the sides with tape. Now it's time for the first round of plaster. When plaster is cured, I remove the mold box and clean the model. I also touch up the mold with crafting knife, but do not interfere with my seam lines. Last, I add little dents. These would act as locks, so parts of the mold are kept in place. When the first piece is done, I put back the mold boxes, apply mold release, and repeat this process until all parts of the mold are finished. Now it's time for the most exciting and nerve-wracking part. I open up the mold. And just like this, one by one, I make all the molds for each and every part of the dolls. I sign the molds and leave them to dry for a few days. With the molds done, we can finally move to making the dolls themselves. Let's start casting the porcelain. Before we begin, we need to prepare the molds and porcelain slip. I clean up the molds from any dust or plaster residue, then assemble them and secure with rubber bands. I mix the porcelain slip, which I keep in ice cream containers, to get rid of any separation or hard components. To ensure it's fully uniform, I strain it through a piece of nylon. Now I begin to pour porcelain into the molds. I pour it slowly and steadily with an even stream. Breaking the stream would cause a visible line on the finished piece. As soon as porcelain is in the mold, plaster starts to soak the water out from the slip. This causes a layer of thicker material to appear on the inner side of the mold. And this layer is actually the porcelain cast itself. As plaster soaks the water, the level of slip in the mold drops, and I add some more to keep the cast foaming. When the cast is thick enough, I pour the excess slip back to the container. And just like that, I repeat this process with each mold until every part of the doll is casted. After a while, when the porcelain in the mold hardens a bit, I can carefully open the mold and remove the pieces. These are hollow on the inside, which is exactly what we need. It's very important to choose the right moments to remove the cast. If removed too soon, it would be too soft and get deformed or even torn. But if I wait for too long, the cast would dry and crack on the mold. Then I remove the spruce, pierce little holes in the joints for wires, and cut the slots for the elastics. This is done to allow the joints to move when the doll is assembled. The dolls are casted and I leave the pieces to dry. However, the plaster is a material that cannot transfer texture and fine detail, so the parts need quite a bit of refinement. First, we need to remove the seams and smooth all the pieces with sanding. I deploy my vent and put on a mask, glasses and working clothes. Porcelain dust is quite dangerous to breathe in, and wearing proper protection is essential. Dry porcelain casts are very fragile and resemble firmly pressed flour. The pieces can be crushed by any sloppy movement, so I have to be gentle with the pieces and hold them carefully. I start by removing the seams with a knife and move on to smoothing the surface. I use fine sanding sponges instead of sanding paper. The base of the sponges is very soft and removes unevenness without flattening the details. After sanding all the pieces and making a horrible mess, I move on to the more delicate parts. As I said, plaster is a relatively rough material and cannot transfer tiny details like fingernails, wrinkles, and so on. This means I need to add detail and definition to every single part by hand. I start by separating the fingers, then carve the nails and tiny creases and wrinkles on palms and fingers. All this is done individually for each doll, which make them unique. Feet get the same treatment. I add definition to every toe, then carve nails, wrinkles and creases on the sole. Last but not least, I refine the face one more time. I carve the ears, add more depth to the eyes, refine the nose and slightly open up the lips. Here is the final version of the face. Seems like we're done, but I take the refinement one step further. I put my dolls in the kiln and do an intermediate firing at relatively low temperature, just 1000 degrees Celsius. After this treatment, the pieces don't reach their final structure, but they become a lot harder and don't dissolve in water anymore. I put pieces in water and soak them for a bit. This will allow me to wet sand and polish them to perfection. And now we are done with sanding and can finally move on to firing the porcelain in the kiln. However, there are quite a few tricks to this art. At high temperature, the porcelain starts to actually melt and the pieces can deform. To prevent this, I put kaolin wool in to support the pieces from the inside. Then I put a layer of silica sand on the kiln shelf. This serves the same purpose and prevents the pieces from flattening at the bottom and sticking to the shelf. The pieces are put carefully on top of the sand. Now, the dolls are ready for the night in the kiln. For the next 12 or more hours, the temperature in the kiln slowly rises. When it reaches around 1200 degrees Celsius, the porcelain melts, like sand melts into glass. At this point, the inside of the kiln is red hot. The next day, I can open the kiln and see the porcelain in its final state. The soft and porous material shrinks and turns solid, glossy and translucent. In my opinion, porcelain is a magical, breathtaking material. The way literal goo turns into delicate, glowing ceramic is pure sorcery, and I can't get enough of it. I quickly clean up the pieces from sand residue, and we can start adding life and character to beautiful, but yet plain porcelain. Let's begin painting. For porcelain, china paints are used. This type of paint is supposed to be fired at about 800 degrees Celsius. By doing this, the paint is burned in porcelain at molecular level, so it never comes off and never fades. To create smooth transition and vibrant colors, I apply many translucent layers of paint and fire each of them. Some parts are fired up to 20 times, and the whole process takes weeks. China paint comes in powder form and is mixed with medium before painting. Let's start with the face. First, I add gentle shading with light brown paint. I put a base shape for brows and eyes, then add rosy blush to nose, cheeks and lips. When a base layer is fired, I move on to finer and finer details. With a tiny brush, I add depth to the eyes, hairs to the eyebrows and paint individual lashes. All of this is painted gradually, throughout several firings, and each time I add more definition to every feature. also paint pupils and add shading to the eyes. Finally, I add highlights with glossy white paint and finish off by painting tiny freckles and birthmarks to make the face even more realistic. Here is the finished result. The girls' and the boys' faces are painted in the same technique. Even though the faces themselves are identical, I made sure to paint them slightly differently. For example, the girl has longer and thicker lashes and more vibrant lips, while the boy has thicker eyebrows and deeper shading. In the end, these two will stay as twins, but would be easily distinguishable. However, we are not done with painting. Each part of the dolls gets a layer or two. Hands and feet also have quite a bit of detail. I start by a rosy base layer on palms and fingers. Then every fold and wrinkle is lined to add definition. I paint the nails and the white areas on them. The rest of the body also get a few layers of shading and then the blush. I also paint freckles on the shoulders and other parts of the body. After many layers and many times in the kiln, all 38 parts of our two dolls are painted. We are done working on the pieces and can finally put the dolls together. It's time for the most exciting step: assembling. The set of parts I was working on all this time is finally transforming into a whole doll. Still, some preparation is required. First, I put metal bars in each joint. This would help proper movement. Also, these bars hold the elastic cord that is used to assemble the dolls. I'll show you later how it works. Rubbing porcelain against porcelain is not a great idea, so let's fix it. I put a bit of epoxy in the places of greatest stress, so nothing would crack when playing with the doll. I then line every joint slot with suede. It prevents porcelain from scratching and provides proper friction so the joints move smoothly. Now the doll can be assembled, and here is a close-up on how it is done. An elastic cord runs through each piece like a thread runs through a pearl necklace. Then a small hook is placed at the end of the elastic, and its other side, on the bar inside the hand, foot or head of the doll. Then the elastic slides inside. It is kept slightly stretched in the doll, so the pieces are tightly held together and the joints can be put in any position. Just like that, the entire doll is assembled. I ram the elastic through the body and attach it to the head with a hook, then slide on the limb pieces as if I was making a garland. The other end of the elastic is secured in the feet with smaller hooks. The arms have their own elastic and are put together the same way. At last, I can take the finished dolls in my hands. Each of them has 18 articulation points and can take a wide variety of poses. The dolls are done, but I am not going to leave these guys bald and naked. Let's give them some hair and nice outfits. Let's address the hair first. For my dolls, I make removable wigs on hot glue cups. Hot glue, regardless its famous misuse, had proven to be a great durable material for wigs. To make the cup, I rub the head with cloth and cover it in a thin layer of hot glue, then cut it to size. Then I start implanting the hair into the cup lock by lock, going from the back of the head up to the parting area. When I reach the top, I cut the wig open, where the parting will be. I push a strand of hair through this cut and seal it from the inside. I flatten the pattern area with the same headpiece while the glue is still hot. I then wet the hair and divide the slog to make the pattern, and put a piece of cloth over to press it. When the hair is dry, the pattern is secured in place and looks lovely. Now it's just a case of trimming and styling the hair. The boy's wig follows the same steps, but short hair requires more precision. Instead of using the tip of the glue gun, I heated a metal tool with a lighter and used it quickly to implant every lock of hair into the cup. It's a more tedious way to do it, but it gives much more control. It is probably a lot better to use a soldering iron for this, but it has to be barely hot, and the one I had scorched the glue, so I switched back to old trusty lighter. Lock by lock from bottom to top, I implanted the hair all over the cup, then make the pattern the same way. Now it's time to give our boy a trim. I got carried away and gave him a bit of Leon Kennedy-inspired haircut, but I stand by this decision. When our couple has hair, let's give them their promised outfits. I sketched out the design I wanted to create and then turned it into a sewing pattern. I am going to sew most of the clothes of silk crepe. I think baby blue would suit these dolls perfectly, so I dyed the fabric with a mix of blue and a hint of purple dye. First goes the boy's outfit. I traced the shirt pattern on the fabric and cut it out. For something so tiny, extra precision is required, so my patterns never have seam allowance and I have to add it. Then I start to carefully put the shirt together. Most of the seams are done by hand. I do a few of bigger and simpler seams on machine, but even these are finished by hand. I attach the collar and the cuffs, and when the shirt is sewn, add the buttons and tiny loops for closure. Next, I made trousers. This time I used dense yet thin cotton. Again, I traced my pattern, cut the pieces, and base stitched them together. Then I made the final seams and finished them. I attached the waistband, added the button and the loop, and the trousers are done. Now let's make the girl's dress. The bodice is very similar to the boy's shirt and it follows the same method. I cut the pieces and sewn them together, yet the girl's sleeves are quite a bit bigger and the waistline is higher. Then I attach the skirt with its numerous folds to the bottom of the bodice. Last, the buttons and loops are added, and the dress is done. And finally, let's tackle the shoes. This time I'm making boots, so I traced my pattern on leather. When the pieces are cut, I softened the toe piece with water and pulled it onto the shoe last, then secured it with a strip of fabric. When this piece dries, it keeps the shape of the last. The heel piece gets a decorative seam all around the edge. Then I cut holes for the laces. Now it's time to assemble the shoe. I put the pieces together and laced them temporarily. Then I sewn the sole to the shoe. It is stitched all around the perimeter of the foot. I add a piece of thin plastic to strengthen the sole, cover it with one more piece of leather, and attach the heel. Then I trim all the excess from the sides and sand the sole to make it perfectly smooth. All is left is to replace the laces with color-coordinated silk ribbons, and the shoes are done. The wigs and outfits are finished, so let's dress up the dolls and see how they turned out. This entire time I thought about the names for this couple, and now when they're finished, I decided to call them Frederik and Friede. Thank you so much for watching this video. I worked very hard on this project and I really hope you liked it. If you did, please leave a like or a comment, and if you want to see how I make other dolls, please subscribe. If you want to find out more about my dolls, please go to sofiedolls.com. My contacts, website and social media links are in description. Thank you again for watching, have a great day and see you in another video.